The house in Spokane had not changed, but something inside it had broken without making a sound. Syverin noticed it on a Tuesday. Not because anything dramatic happened, not because there was a moment anyone could point to and say, there. That was it. It was quieter than that, smaller, the kind of shift that only someone who had spent years sharing silence with another living creature could detect. Kalui was sitting in the center of the living room. His gray and white fur caught the pale light filtering through the curtains, and his body was still, perfectly composed, the way it had always been. But his eyes were somewhere else entirely. Syverin crouched down slowly, the way she had done 1,000 times before, extending her hand with her fingers curled inward, knuckles first, the way Kalui preferred. He had always leaned into that gesture, always met her halfway with a slow blink and the faintest press of his forehead against her skin. This time he pulled back, not with the quick flinch of a startled animal. Not with fear, it was something worse, something that sat heavier in Syverin's chest than fear ever could. He looked at her hand as though he had never seen it before. "Kalui?" she whispered. He turned away, walked 3 steps toward the hallway, stopped, stood there with his tail low, not tucked, but simply hanging, as if even his body had forgotten what it was supposed to do with itself. The heater clicked on. The old wooden floors groaned their familiar evening complaint. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and then went quiet. Everything in the house sounded exactly as it always had. But the silence between Syverin and her cat, that was new. She sat on the floor for a long time after he disappeared into the hallway. Her knees ached from the cold hardwood. Her back protested. She was 67 years old and had no business sitting on the ground like this, and she knew it, and she did not care. Because something was wrong with Kalui, and she could not name it. Over the next 2 days, the wrongness grew. He stopped eating his favorite food, the shredded chicken in gravy that he had loved since he was a kitten, the one that made him appear at the kitchen doorway before the can was even fully open. Now the bowl sat untouched. The gravy formed a thin skin on its surface. Syverin changed it twice a day, hoping each time would be different. It was not different. He stopped drinking from his water bowl too. She found him once, standing in front of it, staring down at the surface, as though trying to solve a problem he could not articulate. He stood there for nearly a minute. Then he walked away. "Maybe he's sick," her neighbor Doreen said over the phone. Doreen had 3 cats of her own and opinions about all of them. Could be his teeth, could be his stomach. "You should take him in." Syverin did take him in. Dr. Paulson ran blood work, checked his teeth, palpated his abdomen, shone a light in his eyes. Kalui sat through all of it with the same distant stillness, neither resisting nor cooperating, simply present in body and absent in every other way. "Physically, he's in good shape for a cat his age," Dr. Paulson said, washing her hands at the small steel sink. 16 is getting up there, but his organs look fine. Heart sounds good. "Then what's wrong with him?" Dr. Paulson paused, dried her hands slowly. "There's something we see sometimes in older cats. It's called cognitive dysfunction. Think of it as, well, it's similar to what happens in people. The brain changes, connections get lost, they can become disoriented, confused. Sometimes they stop recognizing things they've known their whole lives." The words landed in Syverin's chest like stones dropped into still water. "You mean he doesn't know me?" Dr. Paulson chose her next words carefully. "I mean, his brain may not be processing familiar things the way it used to. It doesn't mean the bond is gone. It means the pathway to it might be harder to find." Syverin drove home with Kalui in his carrier on the passenger seat. He was silent the entire ride. No meowing, no scratching at the door, just that same unsettling stillness. She carried him inside and set the carrier on the kitchen floor, opening the door gently. He stepped out, looked around the room as though cataloging it for the first time, and then walked slowly toward the hallway. He did not look back at her. That night, Syverin lay in bed and listened to him. His footsteps were soft but unmistakable on the old wooden floors, a slow, measured pacing that moved from room to room without purpose. He paused at doorways. She could hear him stop, stand, and then continue as though each threshold presented a question he could not answer. And then, from somewhere deep in the house, came a sound that made her press her hand against her mouth. It was not a meow. It was lower than that, longer. A sound caught between a call and a question, rising and falling in the dark, like something searching for an echo that would not come. Syverin closed her eyes. She had lived alone in this house for 9 years, ever since Harold passed. Kalui had been there through all of it. The funeral arrangements, the quiet meals, the nights when grief sat on her chest like a second gravity. He had never tried to fix anything. He had simply been there, a warm weight on her lap, a steady heartbeat against her ribs, and now he was lost inside something she could not reach. She lay awake until the pacing stopped, sometime around 3 in the morning. She did not know where he had settled. She did not go looking, because every time she approached him now, he moved away, and each retreat felt like a small door closing. By the end of the week, Kalui had found a hiding spot behind the old armchair in the guest room. It was a narrow space between the chair and the wall, dark and enclosed, and he spent most of his hours there. Syverin placed a small dish of water nearby and a few pieces of dry food on a paper towel. She did not push further than that. "You're still in there," she told him softly, sitting on the guest bed with her hands folded in her lap. "I know you are." He did not respond. His eyes, barely visible in the shadow behind the chair, caught the light for a moment, and then looked away. But that night, something almost happened. Syverin was in the kitchen, warming soup on the stove. She reached for a spoon and tapped it lightly against the edge of Kalui's ceramic bowl. The same bowl she had used to feed him for years, the one with the small chip on the rim. The sound rang out, a bright, clear note in the quiet kitchen. And from the hallway, she heard movement. She turned slowly. Kalui stood at the kitchen doorway. His ears were forward. His eyes were focused, truly focused, for the first time in days. He took 2 steps into the kitchen. Syverin held her breath. He looked at the bowl, looked at her hand holding the spoon. Something flickered behind his eyes, a ghost of recognition, a thread pulled from somewhere deep. And then it snapped. He blinked. The focus dissolved. He turned and walked back into the hallway, his tail low, his steps uncertain. Syverin stood in the kitchen with the spoon still in her hand and her soup beginning to burn. It was not the retreat that frightened her most. It was knowing that for one brief second, he had almost come back. Spring arrived in Spokane the way it always did, not with a grand announcement, but with a slow, stubborn persistence. The frost retreated from the window edges, the air softened. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a bird began singing before dawn, and then another joined, and then another, until the mornings were full of a music that had been absent for months. Kalui noticed. That was the first thing Syverin observed that gave her any kind of hope. He was noticing things again, not her, not the house, but the world outside the windows. He began spending time on the wide sill in the living room, the one Harold had built years ago, reinforced specifically so the cat could sit there and watch the street. For months that sill had been empty. Now, Kalui returned to it, pressing his nose against the cool glass, tracking the movement of birds and wind-blown leaves with a concentration that almost looked like his old self. Almost. Inside the house, he remained a stranger. Syverin adapted. She moved more slowly through the rooms, keeping her footsteps soft and her voice low. She stopped reaching for him. She stopped calling his name. Instead, she simply existed in the same space, making herself small and predictable, removing anything that might register as a threat in his rewired mind. Doreen came over on Thursday afternoons, as she had for years. They drank tea at the kitchen table and spoke about the kinds of things women their age spoke about. The rising price of groceries, the new family that moved in down the block, whose knees were worse this week. "How's the patient?" Doreen asked, stirring her tea with the same bent spoon she always chose from the drawer. "The same. He sits by the window most of the day, eats a little more now, but he won't let me near him." "Have you tried the tuna trick? My sister's cat went through something like this, and she said if you put a tiny bit of tuna juice on your finger..." "I've tried tuna. I've tried his favorite treats. I've tried sitting across the room reading out loud because someone on the internet said cats respond to familiar voices." Syverin paused. "He responds to the birds outside. He responds to the wind. He responds to everything except me." Doreen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Give it time, Syl. That cat has loved you for 16 years. That doesn't just disappear. Dr. Paulson said it might. Dr. Paulson is a scientist. She deals in might and maybe. I'm your friend. I deal in stubborn hope. Syverin almost smiled at that. Almost. The days settled into a new rhythm. Mornings were for the window. Afternoons, Kalui would wander the house in slow circuits, pausing at certain spots. The corner of the couch where he used to sleep, the patch of carpet near the heating vent where he once spent entire winter afternoons. He would stop at these places, stand for a moment, and then move on, as though visiting landmarks in a country he no longer recognized as his own. Syverin watched from a distance and tried not to let the sadness swallow her. She had read everything she could find about cognitive dysfunction in cats. The website said things like enrichment activities and environmental consistency and patience. They offered bullet points and timelines and the kind of measured optimism that felt like being patted on the head by a stranger. None of them told her what to do when the cat she loved looked through her as though she were made of glass. One afternoon, a Thursday, unremarkable in every way, Syverin was reorganizing the hallway closet. It was the kind of task she gave herself when she needed to feel useful, when the stillness of the house pressed too close. She pulled out old coats, a box of Harold's fishing magazines she still could not bring herself to throw away, a pair of boots with cracked soles, and a stack of blankets folded neatly on the top shelf. She reached for the last one and misjudged its weight. It slipped from her hands. The blanket unfolded as it fell, landing on the hallway floor in a soft heap. It was old, a thick wool throw in muted greens and browns, the kind of thing that looked like it belonged in a cabin. It had been on that shelf for years, maybe longer. She could not remember when she had last used it. As it settled on the floor, something shifted in the air. A scent, dry and faintly woody, like cedar and dust and something else underneath, something warm and lived in. The kind of smell that accumulates over decades, layer upon layer, until it becomes a thing unto itself. Syverin barely registered it. She was already bending down to pick the blanket up when she heard a sound behind her. She turned. Kalui was standing at the end of the hallway. He was perfectly still. His ears were upright, pointed forward. His nose moved. Small, quick twitches, sampling the air with an intensity she had not seen from him in weeks. She froze. He stood there for 5 seconds. 10, 15. His eyes were fixed on the blanket, not on her, and something in his posture had changed. The perpetual tension that had lived in his shoulders since this began. It loosened, just slightly, just enough to notice. Then he turned and walked away. Syverin let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She looked down at the blanket in her hands and then back at the empty hallway. She placed the blanket on the floor, smoothed it out, and left it there. It was not a plan. It was barely even a thought. It was something closer to instinct. The same kind of knowing without knowing that Kalui himself seemed to operate on. She left the blanket and went to make dinner. For 2 days, nothing happened. Kalui avoided the hallway entirely. He rerouted his wandering circuits to bypass that stretch of floor, as though the blanket had created a detour in his internal map. He retreated to his spot behind the armchair. He ate less. He slept more. Syverin's heart sank. She had done something wrong. The blanket was too much, too sudden. She should have introduced it gradually. She stopped herself. There was no manual for this. No correct sequence of steps. There was only the slow, painful work of being present for something she could not control. On the 3rd day, she was sitting in the living room reading a book she was not really reading when she heard a sound from the hallway. Soft footsteps, slow, deliberate. She did not look up. She kept her eyes on the page and her body still and her breathing even. The footsteps stopped, a long silence. Then, the faintest rustle of fabric. She waited a full 5 minutes before she allowed herself to stand and walk, as casually as she could manage, toward the kitchen. The hallway was on the way. She would have to pass it. She would glance, just a glance, and keep walking. Kalui was lying on the blanket, not curled up, not relaxed. He was stretched out on his side, with his head lifted, his eyes half open, his body still carrying the tension of uncertainty. But he was there, on the blanket, by choice. And, as Syverin watched, trying to keep her footsteps steady and her face neutral, he did something that made her grip the doorframe. He pressed his paw against the wool. Once, slowly, his claws extended slightly, catching the fibers, and then retracted. And then he did it again. The kneading motion. The one cats learn as kittens, the one tied to comfort and warmth and the memory of safety. That motion that lives deeper than thought. He was kneading the blanket. Syverin pressed her back against the wall, just out of his line of sight, and covered her mouth with her hand. It was not recognition. Not yet, but it was something reaching up from beneath the confusion. Something that did not need a name to be real. Progress, Syverin learned, did not move in a straight line. It moved like weather. Unpredictable, contradictory, capable of delivering sunshine and hail in the same afternoon. Kalui returned to the blanket the next day, and the day after that. Not always at the same time, not always for the same duration. Sometimes he lay there for an hour. Sometimes he approached, sniffed the air, and left without settling. There was no pattern Syverin could trust, but he was returning. That meant something. She began a quiet experiment. Each day, she placed herself a little closer to the blanket. Not on it, not near enough to invade his space, but in the same room, in the same general vicinity. She brought a chair from the kitchen and set it against the opposite wall of the hallway. She sat in it with a book or a cup of tea and simply existed there. The first 2 times, Kalui did not come. The third time, he appeared at the end of the hallway, saw her sitting in the chair, and stopped. His body went rigid. His tail dropped. For a long moment, they looked at each other across the length of the corridor. Woman and cat, separated by 12 feet of old hardwood and something much larger than distance. Syverin did not move, did not speak, did not even shift her weight in the chair. Kalui stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds. Then, slowly, with the careful deliberation of someone crossing ice, he walked to the blanket. He lay down. He did not look at her again, but he stayed. "You stubborn, beautiful creature," Syverin murmured under her breath, so quietly that even she barely heard it. That week felt like something cracking open. Small things began to shift. Kalui started eating with more consistency. He drank water without the long, agonizing hesitation. He resumed his window sitting with what Syverin could have sworn was renewed interest, tracking a particular robin that had built a nest in the gutter. "He's watching that bird like it owes him money," Doreen observed during their Thursday tea. "He watches everything now, except me. He's in the same hallway as you, Syl. That's not nothing. It's not enough. Since when has enough ever been enough for you?" Doreen set down her cup. "You nursed Harold through 2 years of treatments. You rebuilt this kitchen with your own hands after the pipe burst. You learned to drive at 53 because you got tired of asking for rides. You are not a woman who gives up because progress is slow." Syverin looked at her friend and felt something loosen behind her ribs. "When did you become wise?" "I've always been wise. You just never listen." The following Monday, everything fell apart. Syverin dropped a pot lid in the kitchen. The sound was sharp and sudden, a metallic crash that rang through the house like a gunshot. She winced, more from the noise than from any injury, and bent to pick it up. From the hallway, she heard rapid footsteps. By the time she reached the corridor, the blanket was empty. Kalui had vanished. She found him behind the armchair, pressed into the corner, his body flattened against the wall. His eyes were wide. His breathing was fast. Every muscle was drawn tight. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered from the doorway. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He did not look at her. He stared at the wall as though trying to disappear into it. She left him alone. There was nothing else she could do. For 3 days, Kalui did not return to the blanket. He barely left his hiding spot. The small victories of the previous week evaporated like morning fog, and Syverin was left standing in the hallway, looking at an empty throw on the floor and wondering if she had imagined all of it. She called Dr. Paulson. "Is this normal? The going back and forth?" It's very common with cognitive dysfunction. The brain forms temporary pathways, and then something disrupts them. A loud noise, a change in routine, even just a bad day. The pathways have to be rebuilt each time. Sometimes they come back stronger. Sometimes they don't come back at all. What do I do? What you've been doing. Be consistent, be patient, and try not to measure today against yesterday. Easier said than done, Syverin thought as she hung up the phone. but Dr. Paulson's words stuck with her, particularly the part about not measuring today against yesterday, because that was exactly what she had been doing. Every small regression felt like a catastrophe precisely because she was comparing it to the progress that came before. What if she stopped comparing? What if she simply met each day as it came, without expectation, without the weight of hope or fear? She did not know if she could do that, but she decided to try. On the fourth morning, she made her tea, sat in her hallway chair, opened her book, and read. She did not look toward the guest room. She did not listen for footsteps. She simply sat and let the house be what it was. An hour passed. She turned a page, a soft sound, so soft she almost missed it. She kept her eyes on the book. The sound came again, the quiet pad of paws on hardwood, moving slowly down the hall. She did not look up. Her heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it, but she kept her breathing steady and her posture relaxed and her eyes fixed on a sentence she could not have repeated under oath. A pause. A long, suspended silence, then the rustle of wool. She waited 3 full minutes before she allowed her eyes to drift, just barely, over the edge of her book. Kalui was on the blanket, and this time he was facing her, not looking at her directly. His gaze was somewhere around her feet, unfocused, as though he was not quite ready to close the full distance, but his body was oriented toward her. His front paws were extended in her direction, and his breathing was slow, calm. Syverin turned the page of her book and said nothing. They sat like that for 45 minutes, 2 beings in a hallway, sharing space in a way that asked for nothing and offered everything. When Kalui finally stood and walked away, Syverin closed her book and pressed it against her chest. For the first time in weeks, she did not feel afraid. May settled over Spokane like a warm hand on a tired shoulder. The trees along the street were fully green now, and the light lasted longer, pouring through the windows in golden sheets that moved across the floors like slow-motion rivers. Kalui's world had expanded. He no longer confined himself to the guest room and the hallway. He moved through the house with something approaching purpose. Not the aimless wandering of the early weeks, but a kind of quiet patrol. He visited rooms he had ignored for months. He sat in spots he had abandoned. He was not the cat he had been before, but he was no longer the lost creature who had stood in the center of the living room with empty eyes. The blanket remained in the hallway. Syverin had not moved it. She washed it once, gently, by hand, worried that the washing machine would strip away whatever scent had caught Kalui's attention. She dried it on the porch in the spring air and returned it to its spot, and when Kalui found it again that evening, he settled onto it without hesitation. She began to understand something about that blanket. It had been Harold's. She had not thought about it consciously when it fell from the closet, but the memory surfaced slowly over the days that followed, the way old memories do. Not all at once, but in pieces. Harold had bought it at a craft fair in Coeur d'Alene years ago, back when they used to take weekend drives through the Idaho Panhandle. He had draped it over his lap every evening while he read in his armchair. Kalui, then a young cat, had slept on that blanket countless times, curled against Harold's legs, purring in that low, steady rhythm that sounded like a small engine idling. The blanket smelled like Harold, or rather, it smelled like the life they had shared. The cedar-lined closet, the old wool, the faint trace of pipe tobacco that Harold had given up 20 years ago, but that somehow still lingered in the fibers of things he had touched. And Kalui, whose brain could no longer navigate the present, had found a door to the past. Syverin sat with this realization for a long time. She sat in her hallway chair and watched her cat sleep on her dead husband's blanket and felt something she had not felt in a very long while. Not sadness, not grief, not the heavy ache of missing someone. Something lighter than all of that. Something that felt, if she was honest, like gratitude. "You remember him," she said softly. "You remember something?" Kalui's ear twitched. He did not open his eyes, but his paw moved, that slow, rhythmic kneading, and Syverin let the tears come because they were not the bad kind. Doreen noticed the change on her next visit. "You look different," she said, hanging her coat on the hook by the door. "Different how?" "Less like you're holding your breath." They drank their tea, and Syverin told her about the blanket, about Harold, about the scent that had reached through the fog in Kalui's mind and found something still alive. Doreen listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and when Syverin finished, she said, "You know what this reminds me of? My mother at the end. She didn't know any of our names, couldn't tell you what year it was or where she lived. But every single time someone played Moon River, she sang along. Every word. The brain is a strange and wonderful thing, Syl. It holds on to what matters most." That evening, Syverin tried something new. She sat in her hallway chair, as usual. Kalui was on the blanket, as usual. The house was quiet, the way it always was at dusk, when the light turned amber and the shadows stretched long across the floor. She began to hum, not Moon River, something older, a melody she used to hum while cooking dinner, back when Harold was alive and Kalui was young and the house was full of the kind of noise that a family makes without thinking about it. She could not remember the name of the song. She was not even sure it had one. It was just a tune that had lived inside her for decades, something she carried without knowing she carried it. She hummed quietly, barely above a whisper. Kalui's ears moved, both of them, forward, alert, the way they did when he was processing something important. He opened his eyes. He looked at her, not through her, not past her, at her. Syverin kept humming. Her voice wavered, her throat tightened, but she held the melody, imperfect and trembling, because stopping felt like it would break something fragile. Kalui held her gaze for 10 seconds, 15, 20. His pupils were wide in the dim light, and there was something behind them that she recognized. Not the old Kalui, not fully, but a shadow of him, a shape moving beneath the surface. Then he blinked, slowly, once. In cat language, a slow blink is not nothing. A slow blink is trust. A slow blink is the closest thing a cat has to saying, "I am safe here." Syverin blinked back, slowly, the way she had done 1,000 times before, and the way she would do 1,000 times again. Kalui lowered his head onto his paws and closed his eyes, but his body was turned toward her, and his breathing was deep and even and calm. And the distance between them, which had once felt like an ocean, felt, for the first time, like something a person could cross. June came. The evenings were long and soft, and the house smelled like cut grass and warm wood and the jasmine that grew along the back fence. Syverin had planted that jasmine the year Harold died, partly because the garden needed something and partly because she needed to put her hands in the dirt and make something grow. 9 years later, it covered the entire fence. Some things, given time, become more than what they were planted to be. Kalui had changed, not back to what he was. That cat, the one who knew exactly where everything was and exactly who everyone was, that version of Kalui was gone. Syverin had accepted this, not easily, not quickly, but with the kind of acceptance that comes from loving something enough to let it be what it is, rather than what she wished it could be. But the cat who remained was not less. He was different, slower, more cautious. He navigated the house with a deliberate attention that the old Kalui had never needed, pausing at thresholds, taking stock of rooms before entering them. He ate at slightly different times. He slept in slightly different positions. He had developed a new fondness for the patch of sunlight that appeared on the kitchen floor in the late afternoon, a spot he had never cared about before. He was building a new map. That was how Syverin thought of it. The old map was gone, damaged, faded, unreliable. So he was drawing a new one, line by line, room by room, day by day. And she was part of that map now. Not in the center, the way she had been before, but present, visible, included. The hallway routine continued. Syverin sat. Kalui lay on the blanket. Sometimes she hummed, sometimes she read, sometimes they simply shared the silence, and the silence was enough. He had begun following her again, not the way he used to. Close at her heels, shadowing her from room to room like a small, furry assistant. This was more tentative. He would appear in the doorway of whatever room she was in and stand there, watching. If she stayed still, he sometimes came closer. If she moved, he sometimes retreated. The dance was delicate and ongoing, and Syverin had learned to let him lead. One afternoon, she was kneeling in the garden, pulling weeds from around the jasmine. The back door was open, and the warm breeze carried the scent of the flowers into the house. She was elbow deep in dirt, humming that same nameless tune when she felt something brush against her calf. She went very still. Kalui was standing beside her, outside, in the garden. He had walked through the open door and across the porch and onto the grass, which he had not done since the previous autumn, and he was standing close enough to touch. She did not move, did not breathe. He sniffed the jasmine. His whiskers twitched. He looked up at her, and there it was again. That flicker, that ghost of recognition, that something moving beneath the surface of his green eyes. He pressed his head against her knee. It was light, brief, over almost before it began. But the pressure was deliberate, and the gesture was unmistakable. It was the same greeting he had given her every day for 16 years. The head press, the cat's way of marking what belongs to them. Syverin's hand trembled as she raised it slowly, slowly, and brushed her fingertips across the top of his head. Just once, just barely. He did not pull away. He stood there, next to her, in the garden, in the late June light, with the jasmine blooming around them and the smell of warm earth rising from the ground. He stood there and let himself be touched, and then, after a moment, he turned and walked back inside at his own pace, in his own time, on his own terms. Syverin sat back on her heels and looked at the sky through the jasmine and laughed. Not because anything was funny, because her body did not have another way to hold what she was feeling. That evening was the one that mattered most. The house was quiet. The windows were open. A warm breeze moved through the rooms, stirring the curtains and carrying the sounds of the neighborhood. A distant lawnmower, children playing somewhere down the block, the robin that still came to the gutter every evening. Syverin was sitting on the couch, reading. The lamp beside her cast a warm circle of light. Harold's blanket was folded at her feet. She had moved it from the hallway that morning, a small experiment, a tiny gamble. She heard him before she saw him. The soft footsteps, slower than they used to be, but steady, purposeful. Kalui appeared at the edge of the living room. He paused at the threshold the way he always did now, taking stock, reading the room with his careful new attention. Then he walked in, across the carpet, past the coffee table, toward the couch. He stopped at her feet, looked at the blanket, looked at her. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. He jumped onto the couch. It took effort. His hind legs were not what they once were, and the cushion was high. He scrambled slightly, his claws catching the fabric, and Syverin had to stop herself from reaching out to help because she knew that this had to be his choice. He made it, settled himself on the cushion beside her, adjusted his position once, twice, and then, with the precision of a key fitting into a lock, he pressed his body against her side. His warmth seeped through her sweater. His weight was slight, but solid. His purr started low, barely audible, and then grew until she could feel it vibrating against her ribs. Syverin set her book down. She did not touch him. She did not need to. He was here. He had chosen to come back, not to the same place, not in the same way, but back nonetheless. The path had been long and winding and marked by setbacks that felt like endings. But it had led here, to this couch, to this evening, to the warmth of a small body against hers and the sound of a purr filling the room like a heartbeat. She looked down at him. His eyes were half closed. His paw rested on the edge of Harold's blanket. His breathing was slow and deep. "There you are," she whispered. He needed the blanket once, twice, and then he was still. Outside, the last light of the longest day faded from the sky. The robin sang its final song and went quiet. The house settled into its evening sounds, the creak of wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft click of the cooling air. Inside, a woman and her cat sat together on a couch, connected by something that had no name and needed no name. Something that had survived confusion and distance and the slow erosion of memory. Not everything that is lost stays lost. Not everything that fades disappears. Sometimes the way back home does not pass through remembering, but through something older, something deeper, something that was never truly gone. It lives in the warmth of a familiar body, in the scent trapped in old wool, in a melody hummed in a quiet hallway. It lives in the choice to stay, and sometimes that is more than enough.